Today we welcome Marina Ayton, Vice President UK&I at Wiz.
If you don't give people the tools to actually imagine what the art of the possible could be and say to these customers, you're going to be spending 2 million ARR with us now, but in 4 years, you're probably going to be spending 10 million ARR with us because we innovate so quickly. You need to give them the tools in order to get from there to there.
Marina is also a renowned entrepreneur and the co-author of The Female Sales Leader.
We all wrote this book to educate and inspire more women to get into this industry.
In this episode, we talk about her journey and her transition from first to second line.
I was looking around me and I was seeing lots of people get comfortable and complacent, and I was like, this isn't now the place that I can thrive, be amazing, be developed.
We talk about building and recruiting world-class teams.
In my view, sellers need to level up a bit. The preparation that you do when you go into a meeting can no longer be mediocre, because guaranteed the person that you're probably meeting has probably done a load more research than you.
And the importance of emotional intelligence when building diverse teams. This is her playbook. This episode is sponsored by PGAI and Seller. Go and discover how these solutions can help amplify your sales execution. Check out the descriptions below. Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns. I'm Simon Koutis and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Welcome back to the show, everyone.
And it's with great pleasure that we introduce Marina Ayton once again to the show. Welcome to the show, Marina.
Thank you, guys. It's so nice to be back.
It's actually just been just under 3 years since we had you on, and you're one of 3 guests that we've actually had twice. One was John Kaplan, one was Keith Butler. So you are definitely in esteemed status for sure. But the reason we were so keen to get you back, Marina, is because the first session, it was an exceptional session. We covered so many fundamentals. We had so many comments. You spoke a lot about kind of PG and just a lot of the fundamentals that you experienced transitioning from IC to first line. And fast forwarding 3 years, you know, so much has changed in your career. You're now VP UK&I at Wiz. At that time, you were at Zscaler. And just really want to kind of explore some of that change, some of that transition, because so much has changed since 3 years ago.
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me back. It feels a little bit more professional in this setting. I think last time I was on Zoom with sort of like a furry camera, so hopefully I look better today. Yeah, I mean, it is wild to think that 3 years ago, the position that I was in was literally having just transitioned from being a major accounts director into basically building my first ever team as a first line leader. And I think that period of my life and the decisions that I made and the values that I went about building all of those teams from where I was then to where I am now was so defining in my career and really set me up for what I'm doing now. It was a pretty intense time. From what I remember, we were setting up, well, from what I remember it pretty well because it was pretty hardcore. We were setting up, you know, the first ever effectively enterprise team that Zscaler had ever built. And as a result of that, I was just hiring like crazy. The team went from 0 people in EMEA to when I left, it was about 166 in terms of sellers. And so it was our responsibility as a team, and we kind of looked after the UK, but also EMEA, to decide, right, what are the kind of people that we need in this team? Like, what is the energy that we're going to create? Like, it was a blank canvas, which made it really fun. But equally, when you go into like a blank canvas and your first ever leadership role, a lot of responsibility comes with that because you have to get it right. And, you know, the massive benefit for me, and I think we spoke about this on the last, in the last session, is like, I had the luxury of being able to build a team that had faster and slightly smaller deals, right? It wasn't where I am now, which is like the majors and really the proper enterprise space. It was building a team of young, hungry, high potential individuals. And that was the kind of like character and the people that you were after. That was like one of the funnest bits of my whole career. Like it was like at one point I had, 14 direct reports. It was complete carnage. Wow. We were managing a crazy forecast where we'd have like 34 deals in a quarter, and you're just like swimming with your head above water thinking everything's going to go wrong, but we're just going to keep going and just look for the bad news nice and early and see what happens. So that was then. And then what
you transitioned into second line at Zscaler.
Yeah.
And then you joined Wiz, where you actually took a step back. You went down to first line, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'll come back to the end bit at Zscaler, but it probably makes sense to do it chronologically, right? So so once I built that enterprise team, I had built a certain level of muscle memory, and I kind of got a feel for what I was doing in first line leadership, right? And it's so good because you coach people through so many deals. So you know where you've done a great job, you know where you've done a really terrible job, to be perfectly honest. And we're never the finished article. And first of all, when you go into first line leadership, you are definitely not the finished article, because you go from being, the best at what you did, which is selling, to then having to allow people to fail, make them feel comfortable in failing. But, as a rep, you own everything, right? It's your responsibility. It's your business. And so you have to let go a little bit of some of that control, because you need to allow people the space to learn, grow, make mistakes and all of that. So at Zscaler, then I decided, I'd always loved doing the majors deals, right? I love deals with innate complexity, large organizations, tons of challenges, dealing with company politics and actually really building something, and the more long-term strategic play. And I think now software sales is fundamentally changing in the way that people buy things. And actually what people are looking for is long-term partnerships. And I'm sure we'll come on to AI and stuff like that later, but I fundamentally believe that when you're in enterprise selling or in majors platform selling, right? It's not just about selling the land deal. It's about selling the vision and what is next to come and that partnership in it. So I made the decision to move back into a majors leadership role. And then very quickly after that, after I'd built that business up to a certain point, Zscaler asked me to take a second line position. It was probably a lot faster than I anticipated, but I think I'd built enough credibility within the organization that they knew that I was a really safe set of hands. I remember Izzy saying to me, this is a big step up, right? You are going to go from managing players to managing coaches. And that's a whole different ballgame, Marina, because you're effectively coaching coaches to make their players perform at a higher level. You need to relinquish control. You need to step back. You need to look at the, macro climate and everything that allows that coach to be successful on the field. It was a big learning curve, but it definitely actually wasn't as big a learning curve as individual contributor to first line, in my opinion. Then I got relatively comfortable, I would say, in that second line role. I'd hired a huge number of people. We were an incredibly dependable unit for the business in terms of delivering consistent forecasts. We had a huge focus on development and innovation in our team. So we led a lot of one of the things that I think is so critical when you're in a second line position is actually, how do you create new ways of doing things, new processes, new documentation that can allow people to get on board with the vision that you're setting? If you don't give people the tools to actually imagine what the art of the possible could be and have a big vision and say to these customers, you're going to be spending 2 million ARR with us now, but in 4 years, or in Wiz language, literally a year, you're probably going to be spending 10 million ARR with us because we innovate so quickly. You need to give them the tools in order to get from there to there. So I did that at Zscaler. And then there were lots of things going on in my life at the time. And I remember sitting back and I was like, there is sometimes a tendency to just sit in, basically done this for 10 years, right? I've never had any time off to reflect or sit. It's always been discomfort and pushing yourself to the next stage. And I think I was looking around me and I was seeing lots of people get comfortable and complacent. And I was like, this isn't now the place that I can thrive, be amazing, be developed. And so I made a decision basically to look for something else effectively. And my criteria for what I look for in a business has never, ever changed, right? From when I found App Dynamics to where I am now, it's all around product market fit. Is that product solving a real life problem for our customers, and can I get on board and be passionate about it, right? The second one is leadership. Do they have incredible leaders that are going to commit to my development, that have done it before? And then third and finally is earnings, right? Am I going to be able to be motivated by what the capacity for me to earn is? And am I going to have a great time while I'm doing it? Am I going to be surrounded by people that make me want to get up at 6 a.m. and work till 9 p.m. And I definitely shouldn't say that on a podcast, but like, do you know what I mean? It's not an easy job. Let's not pretend. Like, if you want to work for a high growth organization, your days are not 9 till 5. And I think people have to either decide that they want to do that or not, right? And that will depend on the organization that you go to, right? If you want to work 9 till 5, go to Cisco.
Yeah. This episode is sponsored by Seller. Seller provides a white glove treatment to every complex deal with their bespoke system, whilst ensuring you get the most value from your CRM for everyday selling.
But must have thought about 30 questions whilst you were just, talking there. And I think what would be great is just to take it one step back, which is, first of all, what was the time frames that you were, so as a first line leader, then progressing into a second line leader at Zscaler? What sort of time period was that? How long were you operating as a first line, and how quickly did you transition into a second line?
I went from first line, I did 2 first line roles, one in enterprise, one in majors, but I also had a bit of experience because I hired 3 RDs as well when I was in that enterprise segment to basically run and operate the 14 reps that I had reporting to me. I think people own their own development, right? And that was something that I suggested to the business that we needed to go and do to ensure that those people were looked after, mentored, and developed. So I had a bit of a head start there. Then I moved into this majors role, and then it was honestly only like 8 months. So 2 years, I basically did a first line role, and then I moved into second line. And I think that transition is really weird, right? Because especially depending on the setup of the company, right? But quite often there are other RDs. In general, when you become a vice president of a region or whatever terminology you use in your business, you look after maybe 3, maybe 4 leaders, right? And it's highly likely that if that company's been going for a little bit of time, or if there's some level of maturity, there might already be leaders in place, or you go from being a peer of those people to their boss, right? And that's always a tricky thing to navigate. And I think Ryan said this on it's one of my favorite things that he says, right? Is like, trust is earned in drops, lost in buckets, right? But I think when you rush to get the next job, which on paper, it probably looks like I did rush to get the next job. But actually, like, I think over the period of time and the longevity that I spent within Zscaler and what I achieved over a fairly short amount of time, I did become the most obvious candidate in the room. And, I will treasure the period of time where I became, I went from being Christian Bailey, who is an amazing regional director, if you've ever met him, he was Zscaler from right at the beginning. He was a majors rep. He was a proper operator. And, he was an RD. And at the time, we'd been peers. And, Christian is, he won't mind me saying this, a bit older than me. And I was so nervous about making that transition to go into a role where I was his boss, because he must have worked for hundreds of leaders before. Well, not hundreds. Now I'm really making him sound old. Not hundreds. But like, I wanted to make sure that like I could add value to his business, and I could remove roadblocks, and I could, coach him on certain things, but equally give him a space to run his own team. And I think like when I look back and like the stories that like really define you as in these new roles that you take, like that's one of my favorite things. One of my favorite stories. We are really good mates and still really good mates. I watched him go from like an operator where he did a lot for his reps, i.e. like showed them what good looks like and stuff like that, to then actually being a coach to his reps and developing them and allowing them to fail and like truly getting the best out of his people. I think one of the biggest compliments that you can have within an organization is when everyone wants to go and be on your team, and everyone wanted to be on Christian's team.
Right.
Because he created this amazing environment where People loved being at work. The bar was super high with him because he'd already done it, right? And he'd done these big deals. He had a certain level of credibility. But the other thing that I think people overlook a lot of the time, and I'll touch on it, which is why one of the reasons why I took a step back when I went to Wiz and went back into First Line, is he's so credible in meetings because he truly understands the technology and the fundamental change that technology brought organizations, right? And I think like when you can sit in a room and people are like, whew, he really knows what he's talking about. Not only the stories that he can tell and the customers that he's transformed, but he understands the underlying technical capabilities of a platform, and he could answer any question without an SE in the room. Like, I think that is what great looks like. So like a year back when I made the decision that I wanted something that pushed me again. I was just itching for like a new challenge. And I felt like I had really started to understand like how to do my job properly. So I was like, right, I need to go and find something else. Anyway, naturally, we're so lucky, right? When we work in this industry and we build these amazing relationships with people, I decided that I wanted to go and work again for Dali, Ernest, Josh, all of these amazing people.
Thanks to our sponsor, Pipeline Generation AI, the platform that researches your top accounts, creates insights and assets to help you engage more effectively. Elevate your conversations and transform your pipeline with Pipeline Generation AI today.
So obviously you've spoken about these quick transitions in 8 months moving into a second line role. You know, what were some of the things and some of the real big learnings that you experienced through that process? Where did it go right? Where did it go wrong?
I mean, so much goes wrong, right? But it's about how you lead through either the problems that you cause for yourself, or just general, like companies are changing all of the time, right? So it's about leading through that change. I mean, for me, moving into second line, probably one of the biggest mistakes that I got was focusing too much on the sales function and the revenue, right? Because in my head, I was like, right, I've got this huge number. I need to make sure that everything that I do is about hitting that number, striving to make the reps successful, have a 100% contribution rate across all of my 18 reps, and ensure that my RD is a 10 Presidents Club, right? And that mindset is very first line leader mindset. Right. It is, because effectively when you get to a second line role, you have to trust your first line leaders to do their jobs, which is get the best out of their people, develop them, revenue, and just like an operating cadence, right? Second line is, how do I get everyone rowing in the same direction of my business? So not only are you setting a vision for your team, for the individual teams that sit under you, i.e. AEs and RDs, you are setting a vision that engineering can get behind, that channel can get behind, that marketing can get behind, that TAM can get behind, that customer success can get behind. And I think, you know, I was so used to being so in control and having my arms wrapped around everything. And, you know, when you think about what the characteristics that make great salespeople great, it's about this intensity, this bias for action, this like, just like quite a lot of this. And like realistically, people in other functions don't operate like that, right? They take time to do things. They build plans that have like graphs that have taken them 10 hours, and they, you know, marketing, it's about like the event that's going to change the company's trajectory, but that's in 6 months time. And so you have to start to figure out, and like, I think this, like, it's still something that I'm working on, is like, you have to figure out how you build a cohesive team, but respecting the fact that not everyone operates in the same way as you. And I think that was a really, really hard learning for me, because I am intense as a person and I do want things done quickly, and I do operate like as a break fix model, because I'd rather do something quickly, act with urgency, and maybe get it wrong, but then be able to pivot. But I think like in the long term, like aspect of the business, you do need to take time with things, because if you think about a lot of what second line is about, it's about building like longevity within relationships. So that's like a really important learning, and like that takes time. And I think when you are always in a rush and you're intense and the numbers are critical and all of that, it's sometimes quite difficult. It's sometimes difficult to remember that, but you have to have a long-term outlook, because in the same way that you look after your customers, right? You could build like 4 months of good work and goodwill with a partner. Someone in your team makes one bad decision or does something that's not like in like a whiz value, for example, it disrupts the entire thing and you're back from square one rebuilding, because it's all based on trust and people and stuff. And that, another thing that it took me a little while to like realize is that the higher you get in an organization, like a whisper becomes a shout. Like what you say suddenly becomes a lot louder to people. And therefore, when you are in meetings and you are setting visions or talking to the team, or you're in QBRs and you're making comments, you need to be careful about what those comments are, because people take them very personally, because on paper, you're a much more senior person. But realistically, you know, nothing's changed with me or how I behave. I've just got a more senior title now. But like, that's another thing. So making sure that when you do say something, you've really thought about what it is. You've thought about like what the impact on that individual person might be. And also like if it's feedback, where you give that feedback, right? Feedback from a second line leader can come across a lot more intense than from a first line leader. And I think like just recalibrating your brain to realize that is really important.
One of the points you made earlier, which was, you know, you transition from into first line and then transitioned into the second line role really quickly. And obviously you've got peers either side of you, which you potentially would have been looking up to at some point. And you mentioned one in particular. You know, that imposter syndrome of stacking up or stepping up to a second line. You know, talk us through some of the process of how do you not necessarily deal with that, but you know, how do you come to terms with that, and how do you get to a point where you are feeling confident in your own skin in a role like that?
Personally, I think imposter syndrome is like a gift, right? Yeah. If you don't have imposter syndrome, then are you really in an environment where you're growing, learning, and developing, right? Because I mean, I sit in every single room and I think, oh my God, I definitely shouldn't be in here. And it's like, it's been a constant throughout my whole career, right? So how do you deal with the imposter syndrome? So personally, think about it as a superpower, right? In my opinion, so like I talk about, this is a bit of a tangent, right? But I grew up from when I was 11 years old, having been diagnosed with dyslexia. I was the worst student. I was also terribly behaved, but I was a really bad student. Academia was not my thing. Sport, any day of the week, I was great at it. Anything that was like sciencey and interesting and like a bit more numeric, I was also into it. But like English, history, I was like, absolutely not. These are so boring. And I think in the same way that like imposter syndrome makes you feel like a level of discomfort, right? You just get used to it because you've constantly put yourself in a position where you feel like, you know, you're not worth it, and therefore you work harder than everyone else to ensure that you earn your seat at the table. And I think that, you know, for me, for example, with the dyslexia thing, I've just got so used to having to work doubly as hard as everyone else to get exactly the same results. And I think that that's something that actually, when people ask me like what has made you successful in your career and stuff like that, quite often I'll turn around and say, I honestly just worked harder than everyone else. I wasn't smarter than everyone else. I didn't have any kind of like special things about me or anything like that. I think just like the grit and determination that you learn from a young age then transfers and becomes normal, like imposter syndrome, right? And I also think like with imposter syndrome, I know, and like I didn't really want to get into like gender roles or anything like that, but I think like imposter syndrome, and you know, we did a lot of work on this book that we wrote, and it was so interesting interviewing all of these different people to understand their perspective. And I think that women are just in general we're reasonably good at talking, but in a workplace, women don't want to admit that they feel, you know, imposter syndrome, or they feel like the odd one out, because they all want to be like, you know, I don't know, just like perceived as something different.
Yeah. So I think the reason why I asked the question is that obviously imposter syndrome allows you to apply yourself and, you know, carry on driving through it. And by the sounds of things, you've got work ethic which drives you through it. But at the same time, to command respect of those RDs, you've got to be adding value in some way. And so how do you start by adding value? What process do you go to? And how did you add value to those other leaders to earn the respect? Because again, working hard, you know, isn't necessarily just going to do that, is it?
Yeah, you're bang on. So I think imposter syndrome can be a superpower in all of these rooms, right? But at the same time, when you're in a senior leadership role, you have to be able to control a room, set a vision, have people want to follow you, and really get on board with what the plan is and what you see, what they see ahead of you, right? And you know, one of the things about imposter syndrome is it makes you, like, well, me, incredibly nervous when you like walk into a room, or when you're the first time that you're setting like a vision or strategy for a team, and you've got, you know, for me, like I went through a period of my career where, you know, every single person at one point in a room was a man who was 30 years older than me, right? That made up 60% of my team, like reports down from me. Like that is a really nerve-wracking place to be as like a young 28-year-old standing up in a room, because you think, what the hell have I done to deserve to be here? And why are these people going to take me seriously? And so what I found in my career is it's listening, first of all, right? Really listening, observing, and understanding what's going on, rather than trying to make changes really quickly and make assumptions on things. So that, I think, is the number one thing. I'll give you an example. Like when I moved into Wiz, I rung Mike Ernest and I said, Ernest, I need 10 minutes with you. Like, what is your advice for how I'm going to have a great start in this company? And he was like, honestly, Marina, take the first 4 weeks, sit back, listen. The guys here have done an amazing job. They didn't get to 400, 500 million in ARR by not doing an amazing job. So learn, be a sponge, and like then figure out what we're going to go and do. And that's exactly what I did, right? And when I left Zscaler, I was in second line, and I'd been doing it for a long time, and I'd built up like a lot of like respect from our CEO and our executive team, and they knew that our team was like the one that would always deliver the results on time, etc. I was definitely a decent second line leader, I would say. When I moved to Wiz, I decided to take a step back, right, and move back into first line. And it wasn't because like I would have had terrible imposter syndrome if I'd gone into a second line role. But what my view on it was, is first of all, my ethos is never chase titles, right? It's actually about like all of the criteria that I talked about earlier. And actually, where are you going to develop? Where are you going to have the most fun? And where is your impact going to be? And what's going to set you up for the long-term journey within that company? Because I personally never join a company unless I can see myself there in, 5 years, 6 years, because the learnings in the struggle and those businesses change so much over time that you've got to ride it out to actually learn and see new things and stuff like that. So talking about imposter syndrome, when I got back into being an RD role, like, it's funny because you haven't done that role for a little bit of time. And again, I picked up an existing team who had been very successful, and I had to figure out, right, shit, how am I going to make an impact with all of these people? And how am I going to build credibility in like what was quite a short amount of time? Anyway, it was honestly, again, like the best thing that I could have possibly done, right? The team were at a standing start. All the territories had been changed. A lot of what I did in those first 6 months was about building belief. They hadn't run Playbook before, but it was like, it was doing the playbook in the Wiz way, right? Because we had this wildly good technology that was agentless in the way that it deployed. And fundamentally, that requires a slightly different sales process to what I was used to at Zscaler, which is a fundamental architecture change, which, to be honest, was a massive undertaking for people. So it was like learning a whole new thing, balancing between like customer, like doing discovery, but actually then using technology to do discovery within a sales cycle, but making sure you set differentiated criteria, ensuring that everyone met an EB early. And, you know, that 6 months, that first, 6-8 months that I had at Wiz was actually some of the most fun that I ever had. I remember my first day, we had one of our founders, Yanon, over, who was there. I went to 6 customer meetings with one of our founders. I literally just like learned, observed, thought about, like when I was listening, like thought about how I could add value in terms of like positioning different things that allowed that rep to get to the next stage of their sales cycle. And at the time, you know, some of them had never even heard of the playbook before and it gets a bad rep in a lot of places, because where it's implemented in a like, you know, really stern and like scientific way without the context of what that company does and stuff, well, it is really damaging, right? And customers don't like it. But when you implement it in a way that's about driving customer outcomes and value and long-term partnership, then like no one can really argue that it's not the right way of selling, because effectively all the playbook, in my opinion, does is it allows our customers to validate whether they are buying the right technology for their company that solves a set of problems in a unique way that allows them to operate in a better, stronger, whatever position, right? And when I got to the end of the year, I think I ended on it's much easier when you're an RD to really overperform. I think I ended the year on like 150% of the RD number. And you know, all of my team had some of their biggest earning years. They did their biggest deals. We grew the ASP from like, I mean, I can't even remember. I think it was 120K or something. We were doing like 550K. Wow. And like, it was just fun. But what that then sets you up for is you built the respect and you've built a name for yourself, and you've got your hands dirty, and you genuinely understand that the problem that the technology solves, and you're in the trenches, right? And that's what First Line's all about. And I'm so pleased. Now I've transitioned at Wiz into a second line role, albeit I have been looking after a lot of reps as direct reports for a while now, but we'll come back to that because the hiring thing is the most important thing when you get into second line, and I didn't have any first line leaders. So when I moved into second line at Wiz, one of the fact that I'd done the first line role, the fact that everyone started to understand what I was about, the pace at which I operated, the cadence at which we had, and like, in my opinion, like what makes a great leader is predictability, right? Yeah. Predictability allows top performers to know what's coming and to do their best work because they're never blindsided by things and they like structure. That's what I found, right? Then when I moved into the second line role, like you guys will have seen Wiz on the press, in the press, right? This company is like nothing I've ever seen before. We are growing at like a absurd pace, doubling our revenue every year. You know, we went from basically being probably like having 10 enterprise reps in the UK to then being at the level of maturity where we needed to grow that into 18 reps, right? And so then when you get to 18 reps, you need three regional directors to look after those team. And you have to strike a balance, right? When you're in an RVP job like that, it's like, if you hire the wrong leader, every single bit of work that has happened in that region in terms of culture, values, what you care about can be completely disintegrated overnight if you have the wrong person in there. Like these people, these are the most important hires. This is why I'm so pleased I had experience of being in second line before, because you do make mistakes, right? And you do hire the wrong people and you see the direct impact that has. And so when I was at Wiz, having done that and done that job before, like I ensured, it must have been the hottest job in the market, right? An RD at Wiz at the time in the Enterprise Plus Majors segment, right? 100%. I think I had like over 250 applicants. I probably spent an inordinate amount of time interviewing. I had, 30 probably like really very formal interviews, but it took me the best part of 12 weeks, 9 weeks to find 3 incredible leaders. And like, they actually haven't started yet, but they start at the end of this month. And I know hands down that they are the perfect people for the teams that we have and for the stage of growth that we're at. And I think that that's also a really important thing. It's like, when you're thinking about what the next job is for you or what the role is or what the title is, actually all of that is kind of irrelevant, right? It's what you have to look at is like, what is the stage of the business that you are going to be running, operating, scaling? What's the biggest problem that business has right now? So like, for example, not doing enough multi-million-dollar deals, doing too many non-platform deals and selling across one product set, whatever it is. And you need to think, okay, who are the people and what are their traits and skill set that I need to go and solve this problem? And like, you did an interview with Josh, right? So he will talk to you about this, but like at Wiz, we have this notion of the Wiz way. And I didn't really understand it when I first joined, to be perfectly honest. I was like, what is everyone talking about? But honestly, it's like people are so happy to be at work. They are so excited about the product. The marketing and everything that you see on the outside is like how we function as an internal company as well. It's fun, it's dynamic, the product works, people work really hard, they want to be part of this story. And there is like this family element, which I've always been very conscious of not talking about family at work, because I think when you're leading high performance teams, like with that comes difficult conversations, and you don't have difficult performance related conversations with people that are in your family. Like you, in my opinion, right? Well, maybe sometimes.
I want to take this opportunity to ask you all very kindly to go and hit the subscribe button. Whether you're on YouTube, iTunes, or Spotify, it will mean the world to us if you could hit that subscribe button. It means we can continue to bring you great content and will ensure that you don't miss out on any of our great content.
One of the things that we've not spoken about, and I think it is really important to talk about, is EQ and IQ. And I know that obviously that's something that is a really important toolkit for you personally, but it's something that you really kind of value, and one of the kind of the big differentiators of great leaders. But also it does also lead into some of the more kind of diversity stuff, specifically around building some more diverse teams as well. So just want to really touch on that.
I'll talk about the EQ and IQ bit first, and then I'll talk about the like female sales piece afterwards. So I think EQ is something that is never going to be replaced by AI, right? The ability to read a room, the ability to understand how a human being sitting opposite you is feeling or is going to respond to something that you're going to say based on the tonality of their voice, their body posture, their just like everything, right? How they dress, how they walk into a meeting room, right? Or, when you're sitting in a big boardroom full of people, right? How all the individuals communicate with each other. That's never going to be replaced by AI. And that's why, in my opinion, like being back in person and making sure people understand your personality and can buy into you personally means that salespeople are here to stay, right? On the other side of that, right, you do have to appreciate that we are dealing with a much more informed buyer now. And AI has made access to information so much easier for our customers, for our prospects, and for our partners. And therefore, in my view, sellers need to level up a bit, right? The preparation that you do when you go into a meeting can no longer be mediocre, right? Because guaranteed, the person that you're probably meeting has probably done a load more research than you. And so I think the way that people are going to buy is going to be slightly different just because of the information that is at their fingertips. However, and that means that the IQ point, maybe there's an opportunity, right, for people who don't have such a high EQ to really fill in that gap by, doing the research, learning a bit more, like getting help. Like I mean, for me, personally, like I mentioned earlier, like I'm very dyslexic, like having a AI engine to run my emails through on spell check is like the best thing in the entire world.
With you on that
like,
one.
yeah, like it's amazing. Right. But again, one of the biggest mistakes that people make are relying on that, because it's incredibly obvious what is AI generated and what's not. So like when I was hiring for all of these RDs that were coming into Wiz, we'd get into the interview and we did a panel as part of it. And the ones that are really disappointing are the ones where they've just banged a load of stuff into an AI engine and created a presentation. And it's not personable. It's not about who they are. It's not about like, it just demonstrates like really poor EQ, for example. IQ is actually incredibly important, and the way that I measure it is listening to the questions that people ask and the ability for people to look around corners, right? Jeremy Duggan used to talk about this notion of chess, not checkers, when we were at App Dynamics, right? It's about seeing not just the next move, but 2 moves on from that, and making sure that, when you've got a plan and you've got like a next meeting in 2 weeks, right? What is the path that we're going to take, and what are the accomplishments that we need to make in order to get to that like end meeting to execute with excellence, or whatever it is. The EQ bit is the bit that you can't teach people, right? You've either, in my opinion, you either got it in buckets or you don't. And I think that, going back to your question about like women, my experience, and contentious as it is, my experience is that women have a much higher EQ. And whether that's because I think they care more about what people think about them, I think they have a more maternal instinct, and therefore they want to look after and not offend people that sit within like that room or whatever it is. And so the way that they ask questions can often be a lot more consultative and in line with, and sensitive in the way that, you show up in a certain way and they might mirror you in that way. And I also think that they can be more thoughtful in the way that they think about what what good looks like for that person, rather than walking into a meeting and being like, I need these 5 answers, I'm going to ask you these 5 questions, but not explain at the beginning of the sort of like barrage of questions why you're asking them. So, but again, like that's a very gendered way of looking at it. Obviously, a lot of those characteristics and traits can sit within men, but I think like the EQ bit is a really important element to be testing for within the interview process, within panels, how people take feedback, for example. Like I think the best salespeople that I've ever hired, and all of them have this in common, is that nothing's ever been easy for them, right? Or they have stories of where they've lost things, lost deals, or things have gone really tits up, and they're able to show what that's actually taught them and what the learnings have been. And I think that is like such a powerful thing, because the worst thing in the entire world is a salesperson with ego, right? Thinking they are the best person in the world. And in my opinion, you're only as good as your last quarter, right?
Well, I actually want to reach out and talk a little bit about this, Marina, because you are very busy.
How do you find time to write a book?
I think you've got 3 businesses. You work all hours that God sends, and then you're also a co-author of this book, The Female Sales Leader. Why is this book important, and why did you want to put your name to this?
Yeah, so if you told me 3 years ago that I was going to write a book, I would have laughed in your face. First of all, please buy the book if you've listened to this. It's on Amazon and you can buy it in all good bookshops. But I feel very privileged and very lucky to have landed on my feet in this industry. And I have got here through a series of amazing mentors that all happen to be male, by the way, who have pushed me out of my comfort zone, seen things in me that I didn't see in myself, and just like given me opportunities that I never ever believed that I could have had. And like I grew up in a like family where it was all about equality. My mum was an entrepreneur, so was my dad, and like she was like a real powerhouse, right? And so I'd always had that person to look up to show me the path. And so why did I write the book? I wrote like we all wrote this book to educate and inspire more women to get into this industry. If you are driven, if you are smart, if you have a way about you that is tenacious and you have grit and all of those things, and you really care about solving problems for people and you're people orientated and people focused, like this is an amazing industry for you. And for me, one of the most important things that I can do now is like give women an equal opportunity to get in the door, to be coached, to be developed, and to believe that they can get to a certain height, right? And I think that the biggest challenge that we have in the industry is like, you know, your first ever CRO podcast that you did with John McMahon's CROs, how many were women?
None, not one.
There you go. Right? And that is the fundamental problem that we have, is that there is a limited, growing, might I add, number of very senior executives that sit in CRO, CEO positions, right? And it's on the decline. And actually, we were making great strides in terms of what that looked like in the US until Trump basically screwed the whole thing up again. But if I can make a small contribution to inspiring more women to get into sales for all of the benefits that it has, like earnings wise, development wise, confidence wise, all of the things that it throws at you in terms of opportunities, if you seize it, then I'll be a very happy person.
So first of all, why should men read this?
Yeah.
But also, what are the key things that someone would take away by reading this book?
So, I mean, first of all, the female, very good. First of all, the female sales leader is not a book for women, right? It's actually like quite educational in terms of like the first element is about like what the industry offers, for example, like why is it a great opportunity, what to look for in companies, all of that stuff. Then it's a lot more of like practical advice. So if you're fresh out of uni and you're trying to decide what you want to do, what does your CV need to look like? What do you need to do from a work experience perspective? What does a great cover letter look like? What can you do to make yourself stand out? All of that stuff, right? And then we get into like, actually, what is leadership? What are the transitions? Like a lot of the stuff that we've spoken about today. What are the characteristics that make great salespeople and great sales leaders? And then like all of that doesn't matter if you're a woman or a male, right? I think one of the things that might be quite eye-opening to men is that there's a character in the book called Annie Anonymous, right? And Annie Anonymous is some of the slightly more, I guess, stories that we've heard of things that just shouldn't be happening in this day and age, right? That it might make men think, because like I didn't have any stories from Annie Anonymous, to be perfectly transparent with you, because I've been so fortunate in the environments that I've been brought up in, and you know, the companies that I work for, the men that I've worked for have been nothing short of like what great looks like, right? However, I was appalled by some of the stories that came out of the interviews that we had of women in Playbook organizations like we've all been used to, and just some of the stuff that goes on that either people turn a blind eye for, or, you know, people get sacked pretty quickly for doing these things. But from a male perspective, I think, you know, we hosted this big dinner that we had, which was like almost like a workshop. We invited like some of the top leaders in the industry. And I can't remember if it was Rich Perez or Adam Quartermain that said this. We got everyone around the table to like stand up and say, like, introduce themselves and say like what it was like to be in that room, because I don't think anyone has ever been in a room with 25 women sales leaders, right? We really had an amazing group of people in there. And I think one of them stood up and they said, wow, I'd never really thought about it like this, but this is how you guys feel every day. And it was like the penny dropped a bit for me. And I was like, that is true. Like it was like Reiner, Rich, Adam, Jason Crean, and they were 4 with 25 women. And like, I was like, that's how we show up every single day. Imagine. That's what we get every day.
But that's a penny drop moment, even just having this conversation, right? and you can actually get some perspective of that.
Yeah.
On what you're going through on a daily basis.
Yeah, but I mean, I personally think it's an opportunity, right? It should make you fight harder. It should make you do better. It should make you perform better and actually earn your seat at the table and stuff like that. So I see it as like a massive opportunity. I think it's just about learning different perspectives, right? I think it's very easy when you work in a male-dominated industry to just think that everyone thinks in the same way as you. Like this book talks about a lot of different perspectives, like neurodiversity. We talk about like very specific things, like how to get more women to take leadership roles and come back into leadership roles after going away to have a baby, like how you can actually create environments where you attract top talent that are female. Because as part of this, like we did a lot of research on LinkedIn and stuff like this, the number of Playbook companies that put these pictures on Instagram basically looking like they're on a stag do is wild.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you doing? Like, obviously no person is going to go and be like the one girl in your 20 person like darts QBR.
Yeah.
Like, it's just about like, think about what those images say. Like, yes, of course you're having fun, and yes, that's absolutely fine to go and do that, but don't plaster it across social media, because you're never going to be able to attract the talent that you want. And I think like Alice, you obviously got Alice on the show as well. Like Alice and I have been very fortunate in the way that we both operate and care about our people, and the things that we prioritize are very well aligned. But what it's allowed us to do at Wiz is we genuinely have like 45 women to men in our region.
Wow.
And like
which against standards, which is 33%, is it? Is a third in?
Oh, less.
Or is it less?
Less than. Like in general, sales is like 30% at individual contributor, and it gets worse and worse as it goes
gets
up.
into leadership. Wow.
And especially in Playbook, because of the way that we, this is the other thing from like, everyone can learn from this, right? Just in the way that we go out to market with our CVs and stuff like that, certain types of language stops women from even applying to these jobs.
Yeah.
And so you decrease your pool immediately. So I think there's, I'm not telling you it's a New York Times bestseller, but I really hope that it adds value. And it is like a textbook, right? There's a lot of stuff that you like take away out of it. And if there's only like 2 or 3 like nuggets or value bites that you take out of it, it will be worth reading. I think
when you reflect on, and we've said it in pretty much every interview, is that when we look at this particular series, I think we've got 10 guests lined up, 7, maybe even 8, all came under the watchful eye of Jeremy Duggan
And Steve McCluskey
and
as well.
Steve McCluskey,
Yeah,
sorry,
legends.
which obviously legends in their own right, but that can't be pure chance. It is well known App Dynamics, go-to-market, sales capability was the best in its standards.
Yeah.
If you look across Zscaler, again, as a volume of female, great leaders, great reps coming into that business was incredible. And now, obviously, from a stat perspective, 45 to 55, we're talking 3 of the most successful organizations with some of the best go-to-markets on this planet. You can't say that that's, not by design. Right. And so, the stats and it's proving that, diversity is a really big thing.
But diversity
impact.
breeds diversity, right? So when you put women in senior leadership roles, suddenly people can see themselves in there, see themselves in that role, right? And like aspire to be like that person or whatever it is. And so it's really powerful. But obviously then there's a balance, right? The opposite effect can happen. If you put someone in a role just because she's female, she can't do her job, the whole thing exacerbates. And
it gets worse.
And actually it gets way worse, because it's like, well, she was just put in that job because she's female, and actually she's crap. And like the whole thing spirals in the opposite way. So it's about choosing people for jobs that are the right people and the right fit and that are 100% going to be successful. And I personally think the only way that you can do that is nurture talent from a really young age. And I think like that's what this book is all about. It's a not-for-profit. Like everything that we have a board meeting on Monday just to define exactly what the charity is going to do and stuff like that. But like my vision for it is education for underprivileged young women to understand how powerful this sector is for them, and to like hopefully change a few people's lives.
Great. Well, so it is available to buy, so do go and get yourself a copy. So this is the point where we reflect on what we've spoken about today, Marina. So first of all, thank you so much for coming back. You're very brave to come back into the lion's den with us too. But
I think she's really worth a line.
It's true. I think all your training has really helped you prepare for this moment. This
career highlight.
But I think, just some of the things to kind of reflect is, again, just going back to your fundamentals and who you are, and just looking at your career trajectory, how everything you've done has really kind of stacked up in such a way where you can see at the beginning of your career, it wasn't slow and steady, but you invested a lot of time in really mastering the fundamentals as an IC. That transition then where you went into first line leadership, again, because you had such good foundations, it made your trajectory, it might have seemed like a quick trajectory to get from first line to second line relative, but because the fundamentals were there, that was a really good foundation. But I think the big difference and the big transition from first to second line is always your ability to just step back, and rather than imposing, you're able to kind of really assess, understand. And I think it is a lot to do with the emotional intelligence. I think it is a lot to do with emotional intelligence to know, because that's your compass. I think your compass, in order to really help navigate and say, right now, I need to get these people rowing in the right direction, or I need to just assess the room. That is emotional intelligence. And I think you're someone with a plan. You're someone that really values the fundamentals, but I'm really excited to see how your plan materializes and the trajectory of how the next 3 to 5 years really goes for you as well. So again, I just want to say a massive thank you for you to join us again today. And thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Marina. And I think, as I said, when I reflect on some of these bits, and I don't often do that, is that these interviews are designed to be thought-provoking, right? And, I genuinely believe we probably could have sat here for another 2-3 hours digging deeper into some of the subjects that you spoke about. What I find is really interesting is, as I said, is each of those transitions, albeit that they would have been quick, you were never ever scared to go back a step, right? You mentioned this in Wiz, right? Taking that opportunity. But I think each of those steps that you took back allowed you to be able to really understand each of those business units, especially as somebody that fights, like us all really, with this imposter syndrome. I think, the superpower that you've learned is, by stepping back allows me to really understand where I can add value. So when I take and, move up to the second step, or the next line, I've been there, I've seen it, I understand where I need to add value. Now I understand how I can add value at scale with multiple first line leaders, right? And I think that as a learning is something that I think everybody can take something from as well. So to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you've heard, please do subscribe to our various channels on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. All the links will be in the description below, and we look forward to welcoming you back for another session very soon. Thank you.